This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring a discussion on strengthening India-Germany bilateral relations. The participants are Dr. Harshvardhan Pant, strategic analyst, and Rajesh Lake, AIR correspondent.
This is the first standalone visit of the German Chancellor to India since the biennial intergovernmental consultation mechanism commenced in 2011. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's visit to India is aimed at strengthening security and defense cooperation amid a host of geopolitical tensions. Dr. Pant, we would like you to throw light on what are the expectations from the Chancellor's visit to India.
The expectations are quite high, partly because we have not seen Germany taking this kind of a confident geopolitical role in world politics before. And what has happened in the last year, in fact, has been quite remarkable in the way Germany has transformed its foreign and security policy in relation to what is happening in Ukraine, but also in relation to some of the issues that matter to India in the Indo-Pacific. So I think the expectations are that India and Germany together are going to lay the foundations for partnership that had always been relatively okay, but never really very strong. And so today the expectation is that this partnership will gain momentum, it will gain strength, and it can particularly respond to some of the challenges of the 21st century. And so I think that the anticipation is quite high, and as the Chancellor himself has outlined, he is looking forward to engaging with India more substantively across a range of issues. So I think that this is an important moment in the evolution of this relationship.
Today, the Prime Minister said that security and defense are an active pillar of the strategic cooperation between India and Germany. Would you throw light on that?
Yes, see, that's quite remarkable because Germany is not known for its proactive defense and security postures. Post-Second World War, Germany had a very constrained engagement when it came to security matters because of the historical legacy that it was carrying. Now, in light of what has happened in the last few years in particular, Germany has been very forward-looking in terms of its engagement in the Indo-Pacific. But I think particularly what has happened with Ukraine, we have seen a transformatory moment in German thinking on security matters and defense matters. We have seen Germany outlining an Indo-Pacific policy. We have seen Germany deciding to allocate around 200 billion euros, huge amount that is to be spent in upgrading German defense forces over the next 5 years. And the Chancellor has talked about this as being a historical turning point in Germany's thinking about its own role in global politics. So in some ways, when you look at the transformation that is happening, you see Germany's involvement in the Indo-Pacific. We have had in the last year German frigates sailing into the Indo-Pacific, German jets moving into the Indo-Pacific and undergoing training with the like-minded partners. There is a turnaround, and that turnaround is perhaps being reflected in the statement that you mentioned, that with India being very central to the Indo-Pacific, Germany is looking to engage India more substantively on defense and security, building capacities, working with India in co-production and co-development, but also perhaps embedding India-German relationship in the larger India-EU relationship that had been the driving force for so long.
So today, India and Germany both reiterated the consensus that reform of multilateral institutions is necessary to better reflect global realities. This, along with the statement that PM Modi made, and he said that this is evident from both nations' active participation within the G4 to reform the UN Security Council. Would you elaborate on this point, please?
Multilateral engagement has always been the strong point of India-Germany relationship. Germany, for obvious reasons, had been a great votary of multilateralism in global affairs, and India, of course, has been one of the strongest proponents of global multilateralism. And therefore, both Germany and India have for a long time now been championing this move to reform the UN Security Council. And as you point out, as part of this group of 4 countries, where India and Germany have joined hands with Japan and Brazil to move forward to push the agenda on UN Security Council reforms. And that had been the core of Indo-German multilateral engagement. And both are aware that this is a particularly difficult moment for global multilateral order. Both are aware what has happened in Ukraine, where the multilateral institutions have been found wanting. Before that, what happened during COVID, when it comes to Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific. All of them point to the breaking down of the multilateral system that had evolved post-1945. and that in some ways has benefited both middle powers like Germany and India to continue to prosper. And I think today that moment is upon us, upon the world, to talk more seriously about UN reforms. India has been a strong votary. India has been saying it very, very aggressively, in fact, very taking it up strenuously. Indian Prime Minister often has reflected upon it. His statement 2 years back when he was addressing UN General Assembly, he basically pointed out that how long can 1.3, 1.4 billion people wait for UN reforms? There is a sense of despondency in India about UN Security Council reforms. And if those reforms don't happen, it would make UN irrelevant to the larger global order. So I think both Germany and India have been at the heart of this conversation, and both would like these reforms to take place before the global order frays even more. So at this time of polarization, this is the voice of two middle powers in the international system, basically arguing for a fundamental rethink on the way we organize our global institutions.
There's also, Dr. Pant, an active cooperation between India and Germany in the fight against terrorism and separatism. Both countries agreed that concrete action is necessary to end cross-border terrorism. Do you think there is something more on the anvil in this relationship between the two countries? More could be expected to tackle terrorism and separatism?
This has been one of the singular pieces of issues and agenda that India has taken forward in terms of its engagement with the global community over the last several years. And for India, it is important that at a time when the world is seemingly looking at great power contestation, great power polarization, and multiple crises around the world, that attention should not be taken away from terrorism, which continues to exact costs around the world. And in that context, Germany and India, and having German support in that endeavor is very important, because Germany, the heart of the European Union, can translate some of these ideas into concrete actionable policies. India and EU convergence on global terrorism, extremism has been very substantive, and various institutional and procedural convergences have emerged where the two have worked together very, very seriously. So I think Germany taking it up at a bilateral level with India also signals Germany's resolve that they continue to see this through a lens which helps India. It continues to see this problem as one where both India and Germany will continue to work together, and as a problem that perhaps should not go away from the global agenda.
Green and sustainable development partnerships were announced during the Prime Minister's visit to Germany last year, where he highlighted that both nations are expanding cooperation in the areas of climate action and sustainable development goals through this. So what could be expected going forward?
India, of course, has today become one of the exemplars of when it comes to environmental policy. For a developing country that has always talked about the fact that developed world should take greater burdens, today is also proactive in articulating a response to this challenge, whereby India is arguing that it is willing to shoulder its own set of responsibilities. And if you look at the parameters, those parameters have been quite evidently being satisfied by Indian response. If you look at the targets that are being met, whether it is about renewable energy, whether it is about climate action, all of those targets are much beyond the scope of what India had initially outlined. So I think India is doing very well in that regard, but what it needs in that journey of sustainable development and climate action is support from the developed world. And one of the most important things that India has always pointed out is that financing of green, clean technology should be at the heart of this conversation. The developed world cannot shirk away from that responsibility. They have to finance a lot of these initiatives in the developing world. And so India, I think, with Germany in particular, that has a remarkable record in climate action, and that, of course, has shown remarkable resilience in the energy sector. If you just look at last 1 year, where Germany, that was energy dependent to the tune of almost 30% on Russia, has in a remarkable period of 1 year turned around their status, and it is no longer dependent on Russia today. So I think there are lessons to be learned here and technologies to be shared with India that perhaps India has made part of its green agenda with Germany. And that is what I think is going to be one of the most important propelling factors in this relationship, that Germany will now be a very, very important partner for India as India decides to take forward its climate action and sustainable development agenda.
Apart from green and sustainable, as you very rightly pointed out, we could also expect science and technology collaborations with Germany going forward.
Absolutely. If you recall last in December, when German foreign minister was here, she had outlined with her Indian counterpart the mobility framework between the two countries. And that basically meant that Germany today is keen on tapping Indian talent. Germany is keen on working with India in science and technology in particular, where research and development and the kind of technological achievements that are possible with collaboration with each other should be at the heart of this engagement. So I think what we are looking at, the science and tech partnership, is something where not only institutions work together, but individuals also find their capacities enhanced, their abilities enhanced as they engage with each other across these two nations. And I think that the framework for that has been laid. One can expect action on that front moving forward as the two countries that are really giving weightage to science and tech, both in their developmental goals, developmental agenda, as well as in their foreign policies and national security policies. That is going to be a very, very important track, particularly as you also look at the fact that technology cooperation today is at the heart of global engagement. So increasingly, countries are developing technologies, partnering on technological frontiers with like-minded countries, with trusted partners. And I think as Germany looks away from China, India is going to fill that void, and India will be a very, very important player in that regard.
Dr. Pant, Germany is the 9th largest investor in India, with cumulative foreign direct investment inflows of roughly about 14 billion from April 2000 to September 2022. And today, the two leaders also interacted with CEOs and business leaders of both sides. So what could be on the anvil going forward? Incentives, ease of doing business, visa easing, what all can we expect?
There are two aspects to this. One is, of course, it is related to the mobility pact that the two countries have been focusing on, where visas, issues of mobility, ease of travel, that becomes part of the conversation, that we no longer are looking at each other through a prism that's outdated. We are willing to engage in the human resources, in the economic talent that both countries have, and share that talent across the frontiers, across the boundaries. And I think that sense is very much visible today. The other is India today is the biggest economic story in the world, and that I think is fueling a lot of interest even in countries which have been relatively conservative. And Germany, despite a lot of potential, that potential remains unfulfilled with Germany in terms of our economic and trade ties. And I think this is a moment which I think Chancellor Scholz has clearly outlined and articulated, that he sees that potential today and he wants his corporate sector to fill that void. Given that we are looking at a shift away from China, we are looking at a shift where India is the fastest growing major economy in the world, where Indian government looks today much more trade friendly than ever before. I think all those, if you put together, you find that this partnership has enormous potential, and that potential can be realized rather than just be talked about.
Very important today, the Prime Minister said India is encouraged by Germany's interest in opportunities arising out of Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat. And that's a very positive sign.
Absolutely, because I think a large part of India's partnerships today are defined by ability to attract those countries or to partner with those countries that can help India in expanding and enhancing and in consolidating its manufacturing base. And that sense of Make in India and self-reliance, I think many countries have really taken this proactively and have moved fast and furious on this agenda. I think Germany is also now realizing that traction of India, that if India is to be targeted, if India is to be lured, then one of the most important things is how do you co-develop, how do you share technologies, how do you co-produce in India. And I think that element increasingly being reflected across Europe, and now Germany is also joining that bandwagon. And of course, both multilaterally with EU and bilaterally with individual European states. That's the agenda that I think India is keen to take forward. And most European countries today want to come to India and partake in the Make in India initiative.
So the rapid exchange of meetings between Chancellor Scholz and PM Modi shows a new confidence and perception. Thank you, Dr. Pant, for being with All India Radio.
Thank you very much.
You were listening to a discussion on strengthening India-Germany bilateral relations. The participants were Dr. Harshvardhan Pant, strategic analyst, and Rajesh Lake, AIR correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on a mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.